Okay, I'm here again, this time with a shirt on, to talk about voting, how to vote properly, how to use your vote wisely, how voting works, to denounce vonk as the rubbish that it is. And I'll do so in a different light because I will be running as a federal Senate candidate at the up-and-coming election. And I shan't be speaking much about that. I'm waiting for my final nominations to come through. But I'm not here to promote myself. I'm here to promote democracy. Now, if people aren't aware, I've been in the political arena about 20 years, and I spent a majority of that time trying to help my fellow Australians and animals, as people know. And the most important thing is to empower democracy in your vote. Now, before I start, I know that a lot of people are aware that democracy is a bit of a failure for us, and a lot of people are disillusioned. Quite a large percentage, I think you'll find over 30% now are disillusioned with the major parties, and that's understandable. I'll talk later in this video about a few other items, but the main thing is to talk about how voting works and how you can best use your vote. And to some degree, I'm promoting, obviously, voting away from the major parties because I believe that that's what most people wish to do at the moment. When I say most, I believe that the figures are, excuse me, around 35% of people or more are not happy with the major parties. There's another 60% of voters that sort of jump between Labor and Liberal and have done all their lives. And there's a certain amount of voters that have just given up on the system, which counts for around 6 to 8%, maybe 9%, and they're called informal votes. So there is a push away from the major political parties, and you need to know how to use your vote wisely to make sure that it does count. So I'll go over that, and then I'll continue on to talk about the shortfalls in democracy, the various problems with having a electoral system that's written and promoted and partly run by the major parties who obviously have something to gain from the inclusion of structural biases in their favour, and so on. So there's a lot to talk about, and I'll try and be quick. So that's your ballot paper there. That's hope you can see that. It's my fabulously drawn lower house ballot paper. In this case, I've listed 5 boxes. Generally 5 or 6 will be the answer. You can occasionally come across 7. You're going to have on each single one's going to have generally the Greens, Labor and Liberal, and then you're going to have possibly an independent. You're going to have possibly a minor party and maybe a Conservative minor party as well. And what you must do for your vote to count is mark all of the boxes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the order of your choice. That is the only way your vote counts. If you don't fill that ballot paper in and just put it in the bin, then your vote doesn't count. That's called that's not even a counted vote. If you fill the ballot paper in incorrectly, that's an informal vote. So if you get a text to mark and put lines through here and write things on there and do anything like that, like that's been suggested online, that vote won't count. It goes into what's called the informal pile. The informal pile is getting worse each year, which is a real shame. I'll show you a graph once again. Beautifully designed graph, as you can see here, and I can't read it properly with my glasses on, but basically this little section here is informal. Those votes don't count for anyone. Then you have Labor, Liberal and independent minor parties. Now, interestingly, they're running about spot on. Basically 30% odd or more don't want the major parties, 30% want Labor and their Greens friends, and about 30% want Liberal and their friends. So it's a really balanced issue. Obviously, we don't have an independent, independent's not the word, a powerful minor party to take on Labor and Liberal. What we need to do, we need to look at some mix. So back to this ballot paper. What will happen, unfortunately, with that ballot paper is that most people will mark either a Labor or Liberal on there. So most probably you get Labor or Liberal. If you are sick of the major parties, you put Labor and Liberal at the bottom, kind of like I've done here, and the Greens, and you put an independent or a minor party above that. There's a couple of benefits to doing that. Firstly, the person you put as number 1, if they get over 3% of the vote, they will get some funding, which is about $2.76 a vote, return to them, and that helps them cover costs. There's pretty extensive costs running for politics. They're getting higher and higher, and most of those costs are being targeted at the minor ones to get them out of the way. If you, for instance, sake, prefer Labor over Liberal, but you'd still like to say to Labor, hang on, you're not doing the right thing, you can still go 1, 2, 3. Whichever of the major parties you put over the other will most probably get your vote. So for me, for instance sake, how would I vote? I can't stand any of them, and I'll fight. I fought for 20 years in the courts because I don't think you should have to preference them all. In fact, the party I'll be running for does not want to you to have to preference them all, because we're a constitutional party. We're interested in the law, and the law does not and should not and ought not force you to prefer someone if you don't like them. So I would, but if I was to do it, for instance sake, I don't like Labor or Liberal. My experience in 20 years is Labor are more dirty than Liberal. So I'd probably put Liberal over Labor. I'd put Greens at the bottom because they're not going to get a seat, a lower house seat, but very rarely. They're there just a preference over. And the same will happen in a lot of seats with Liberal as well. I will always put a minor person or an independent above. That's me. You can make your own decision. If you're a Labor supporter and you want Labor to get the $2.76, put number 1 in their box. If you are a Labor supporter and you're not really sure they're doing the right thing, put a couple of small players above them. It won't really make a lot of difference, because the bias in the system will tend to press your vote across to one of the majors. Okay, that means that at the end of the day, you're going to end up with a Labor or Liberal government, most probably, if we're lucky, with a few minor people in there they have to deal with, because that always means those minor players, as much as they'll have to deal with either Labor or Liberal, but they'll get very, very good results for their electorate, which is what they're there to do. The Senate. The Senate's different now. In the past, in the Senate, you had to put either 1 above the line or fill in all the boxes below the line. Now, that looks like a lot of candidates. The actual paper you'll receive will be massive, absolutely massive. There'll be maybe 100 names on there, and there'll be a ton of boxes above the line, a ton of boxes below the line. What you've got to remember is, once again, you must fill this in accurately. If you put lines or text marks or draw pictures of penises or whatever it is you may decide to do, or none of these people suit me, which is, some of them won't, that'll just go into the informal pile and not be counted. Wouldn't matter how many people did that. It could be half of Australia could all do that. It wouldn't make any difference. It will not sack the government. The electoral law doesn't work that way, nor does the Constitution. So you have to now mark, it's different. In most of the states, I'll exclude the territories here, in most of the states you must mark 6 above the line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 12 below the line. Not quite sure how they came up with that. They actually did it for the wrong reason, but it empowers you. In other words, the minor parties were getting together and helping each other to get a couple of people into the Senate to police the legislation coming from the lower house, which is whoever makes up government. The Senate's what's called the House of Review to some degree. And what happens is if Labor or Liberal get in, whichever it is, if they're doing stuff, they've got to pass it through the Senate, and the Senate can start to question things. What we need in the Senate, in reality, is independent voices, because, for instance sake, if you voted me into the Senate, I would apply constitutional law and your rights and liberties and what would best protect your best interests. They won't necessarily do that. The Labor senators or Liberal senators will run with the party line. People like me will question them and bring up and read legislation and expose any issues within that legislation we don't think is correct, and ask for changes to be made. And obviously, the more voices like mine or whoever you prefer that get into the Senate will make a lot of difference. So you can do 6 above the line or 12 below. Now, what that enables you to now do, if you're part of that 30-odd% that don't want to vote Labor and Liberals, you do not have to even include them anymore. Now, that's really important, because once again, the same thing happens. If I was running and I'm above the line here, and for the party that I may be running for, if you put a tick there and my party gets over 3%, we get some funding back, and that really helps, because generally we'll be scraping the barrel compared to the big players. They've got a lot of money, as you know, and most of their funding comes from the big corporate sector, who just coincidentally get tax breaks or pay no tax in this country, which I'm offended by. But anyway, that puts some money back to us. It'll flow along. Now, by being able to put 12 below the line, that's not too hard to ask of people. You don't have to fill in the whole lot. I think that's the way to go, because you could say me and then someone else, someone else, someone else, or Labor, someone else, so on, and run along individually and put those 12 names in, and your vote will count. If you do the put the bars as last type thing, is what I'm obviously suggesting. You do send a strong message, because the major parties see a result that's not in their favour. Excuse me, they lose funding. And funding can go to some of the minor players. And of course, generally we're beating around down on the bottom end. And obviously we get some funding back. That means we can recoup and look at the next election and try and get better and better and have more to offer the public. So that's how voting works. Putting a text line through this goes into the informal poll and it's not counted if 50% of people did that. The vonk you hear about, voted no confidence, is not upheld by the Constitution. It's debatable and arguable, but the Constitution talks about representative government, and it talks about one value, one vote. Constitutional representative government means that as a representative or a budding representative, I should be doing the will of those that elect me. Now, we know that doesn't happen, and that's one of the biggest problems with democracy and the political agenda in Australia. But most of that's really your own fault, because if you blindly follow a political party and you see Labor written there, and there'll be the 5 Labor candidates under here running for the Senate, and generally you really should know who those 5 candidates are and what their real agenda is and where their heart lies. One of the problems, and I'll go on to that in a moment, is that representative democracy is failing us, and I'd like to get in and try and change that. And I've tried to do that for 20 years, so no one can doubt that I have a lot of interest in electoral law. So 12 boxes below the line's fine. That's the states. Obviously in the territories, you only need to put 4, I think it is, but you'll need to check that yourself. If you want to put 6 above, that's okay, but obviously when you put a 1 here, it goes through these people here first, then goes to the next one. So you're actually voting for most of the players. This way, by voting below the line, you can be a bit more informed. Take the time to find out. It's worth it. It's your only input into how a government's created, and I think you should try and do that. Now, some of the problems. The Constitution, now you can turn off now if you don't want to hear any more. I'm just going to rant on for a few more minutes about important things you need to be aware of. First of all, everyone talks about preferences. You do not need to look at preferences. Who cares what backroom deals the politicians have done? Do not take the how to vote cards. You really don't have to. You are in control of the preferences yourself. If you want to vote 12 below the line, when you get there, you decide where those 12 go. If I had my way, you'd have a copy of this paper a week before so you could do some research and some details on those candidates. Once again, that's something I'd actually fight for. The same applies here. You don't have to pick up a how to vote card from any of the players to tell you how to mark 6 boxes. I'm sure you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and use your heart to determine where that goes. If you can't really have an educated one, we'll do the best you can. But you don't need how to vote cards, okay? How the majors decide to preference each other is backroom deals. Sometimes they're pretty dodgy. I've been involved many times over the years and found them to be pretty dodgy. So you don't have to look at preferences. You are in charge of your vote. No one knows what you've written. If you're embarrassed and you want to tell mum and dad that you voted Labor, tell them you voted Labor, but you can fill that ballot paper in secret in any way you like. Some of the other problems that they're doing, the major parties have slowly been losing control of this country. They're keeping control mainly because they can manipulate electoral law, and they're also stepping outside that manipulation and starting to do dodgy things in the background. And those dodgy things include trying to intercept postal ballot applications and making that bigger. If you wish to vote by postal ballot, you must approach the AEC, which is the Australian Electoral Commission themselves, and make sure that the ballot paper comes from them and goes back to them. So you can also just check by punching in the PO box number that's on your return thing, because the major parties will pretend to be the AEC, and that's really dodgy, and I don't think they have any right. 2, you can had a bit more security. When we first voted in this country, we used ink, we used ID, and we used a steel locked ballot box. Now we use a piece of paper, a pencil in a lot of cases, and a cardboard ballot box. Kind of a step backwards. I suggest taking a pen. It's not the biggest issue, but it does help. I think it does. It does mean that your vote's solid and it can't be tampered with easily. But that's up to you. It's not the end of the world. The thing about trying to rig an election is you can do all sorts of dodgy deals, make false promises, manipulate the media. You can do a lot of things, but there's a hell of a lot of good workers out there that work for the AEC. It's pretty hard to do anything openly dodgy too easily. So we do have a system that is probably fraught with danger and a bit of dodginess, but it's generally only at 6 to 8%. So you still, even though that exists and it's terrible, you still have a lot of power. Your vote still has a lot of power. And if people start talking around each other and try and decide to make differences, like in the Senate, where we need that House of Review to be semi-independent and more representative of the people. Representatives, interesting. I think it should be about protecting the people, representing and protecting the people. The major parties don't like the word protectionism. It really annoys them. So you can sit back and go, okay, I think Australia's doing fine. My bottom line's fine. I've got a good job, blah, 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 and I want to vote for the majors. Well, you can do that. If you want to vote with follow the majors how to vote cards, well, look, really, if you can't work out where you're going to put 1 to 5 or 1 to 12 on a ballot paper all by yourself, that doesn't sound very educated and adult, but they will try and manipulate that. Some of those how to vote cards have been known to be wrong. Multiple voting is also an issue, so if you see something, say something. So that's how elections work. My interest has always been to enforce the constitutional values that were there initially. So, we need better security of the ballot. I think we need better freedom of choice, and that freedom of choice should be an informed choice. There should be freedom of communication that's protected better between someone like me that wants to represent you, and so that I can also hear your views, that your freedom of speech is also protected. And I believe the Constitution does protect all of those things. And if I got into Parliament, my aim would be to remind the major parties and the people in the Senate that this is the rules, here's the Constitution. Why don't you learn to understand it, because it's there to protect the people from Parliament. You must remember, and very importantly so, that you are above Parliament. You control this country. We are democracy, Demos Kratos, which is the description of democracy, means power to the people. In other words, we run the country, we elect people to do a job for us. And one of the things we see is obviously a lack of accountability, where the major parties, you never really see all their candidates, but you just see the head honchos, which is the ones running for Prime Minister, saying we'll do this, this, this and this. The fact is they don't have to honour that. They've written that into electoral law, so they can make any sort of promises. I mean, I could be a real dick like them and say, oh, if you vote for me, I'm going to give everybody $2,500 cash so you can go out and buy a new car or whatever it may be. I wouldn't have to honour that, and I think that's wrong. I think it's past time that they make some sort of promise and they don't back it, they should be sacked. The same when you see candidates, they run for a certain party, they get elected in that party, then they jump ship as soon as they get there and join another party. Well, obviously the voters have been ripped off, because the voters voted for, if you vote for me for a political party, and my job is to represent you and your right will, and to represent and do the right thing by the party. One of the issues that has caused the divide is that people are meant to be above politics, and the Constitution defines that separation of powers of politics and judiciary and political parties. But representative government's meant to be about me being elected by you to represent you. The major parties sign contracts with their candidates, so the candidate is elected by you but has to do the will of its party, and that separation of genuine representation of the people is one of the constitutional issues that's arisen. Same as the constitutional issue of selling your assets. I mean, your assets are there, they've been paid for by you. Really, they shouldn't be unsold, particularly to foreign nations. But anyway, I'm getting off track. There's my presentation on how to vote properly. You do not have to listen to what I've had to say, but you do have to fill in your ballot papers accurately for them to count. to throw your vote away and think that you have no power and you've given up. I'm sorry you feel that way. I know a lot of people do. It's not the right thing to do. There are good people that run. I know over the years you've not seen a lot of that, but us small guys that have been trying, I've tried for 20 years, it's very, very hard to get in. The system's not open and transparent and fluffy and kind as we'd like to see it. And so I keep battling on and other people keep battling on. We're not losers, we're people that care. And we use our own money and our own time to try and get into a position to make life better for you. And unless you give us a chance, we can't. If you wish to continue to reward the major parties, then the direction of your nation will stay on the same track that it is now. And if you think that's good, I've got to say I'm dismayed by that. I really think the country was better 30 years ago, and I think that we could reclaim some of those beautiful freedoms that we've lost, and also work together to get rid of some of the division we see that's destroying this country. But either way, vote properly, vote once, do it properly, take a pen and care, because it's the only input you get. And you've got no right to whinge and complain about the state of your nation if you don't at least do that one thing that you've got the opportunity to do. Thank you.